Thank you, Devontae. Well, the National Defense Authorization Act has required the government to study ways to improve special education services in schools run by the Department of Defense. Well, Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy says more needs to be done to improve literacy in children with disabilities.
The NDAA requires the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, to study ways to improve special education services in schools run by the U.S. Department of Defense. I got my mind on dyslexia. Let's make sure that children who learn to read differently, they learn to read in some way, whether they are in a public school, a private school, or in this case, a school run by the Department of Defense.
Cassidy says this is something that he will continue to push for as a ranking member of the U.S. Senate Health Committee.